we're at a point where we're really going to be concentrating on your research papers. Okay, that's what we're doing now. We'll go back to more essay writing in a couple of weeks, but right now we're going to concentrate on your research papers because probably most of you have a lot to do still on your research papers, and I want to make sure that you do that correctly. Okay, it's critical that all of you plant in your head that every idea you take from somebody else, you have to tell within the body of your research paper where that idea comes from. Okay? Now, last week we showed you how to make up an outline for your research paper. And so, what that outline was involved taking those ideas that you got from somebody else through your research and ordering them, setting up different sections of your research paper, realizing that probably most of what you're doing with your research paper is going to break down into 3 or 4 or 5 parts. So I used the example last week of Nathaniel Hawthorne, witchcraft, its effects on him, the fact that he lived in Salem, Massachusetts, and then where we saw witchcraft appearing in his short stories and then in his novels. So the outline that we created last week involved laying out all of our idea cards, and then setting up one section on just Nathaniel Hawthorne, just the man, trying to show why witchcraft and Salem, Massachusetts would have an effect on his life. Okay, I mean, it does seem kind of obvious, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's like, wow, he was probably even more affected than most other people. Okay, so we set up one section on there, and we broke down our idea cards in that area and put them in a logical order too, so that we could tell, how his background, how his family life, how his ancestry, all of that, and his locality worked in him being so involved in witchcraft, okay, and in Salem. And then we said, okay, so now we've established that Hawthorne is going to be interested in witchcraft. Good. Well, it shows up in his short stories. So let's talk about 2 of his short stories where it shows up well. So we had section 1 on Hawthorne's life. We used a Roman numeral 1 to indicate that, and then a Roman numeral 2 to indicate the second big section, which was witchcraft in Hawthorne's short stories. And we used A, the short story Young Goodman Brown, and then we broke down the different parts of Young Goodman Brown, and B, the short story The Minister's Black Veil, and we broke down the different parts of The Minister's Black Veil. Okay, and then we went into Roman numeral 3, witchcraft in Hawthorne's novels. Okay, so I'm reviewing this again so that you know that the outline is the skeleton for your research paper. And so in there we talked about the Scarlet Letter and the House of the Seven Gables, and we could see that we didn't have a lot of cards about either of those, and so we knew we needed to do more research, collect more ideas about that part of our research paper. Okay, so so we showed you that in your outline last week, so you should have a pretty solid idea. And of course, you were supposed to do an outline for us for this week. I just took a quick look at some of them. I had company from out of town over the weekend, so I didn't get a chance to look at a lot of the stuff. But it seems like you know what you're doing and you're able to set things up. The critical thing is now, as you enter each of those ideas into your paper, or as you expand those ideas into full-length writing, make sure that at the end of each of those ideas, you give credit to the author of that idea. You give credit to exactly where you got that idea from. And it comes at the end of every one of those ideas. Okay? If it is an internet source that you're using, then you probably don't have page numbers. Okay? So if it's an internet source, you will probably just have the author's last name at the end of where you get that idea from. Okay? If it is in print, then you'll have page numbers, and so you'll have the author's last name and the page number. Now, your book has all of these sample forms laid out, and I believe I gave you these pages another time, but we're going to give them to you again to make sure that you get it. Okay, so all of the samples for how you document within your paper. This isn't the list at the end. This is for every idea within your paper, okay? And the samples in your book start on page 404. This is in the 10th edition. Some of you are using another edition, so you may have to look around a little bit for it, but look under MLA style, and then look under in-text citations, okay? So if you're using a form, if you're using a book other than edition 10, you'll have to look up the pages yourself. In edition 10, the one that most of the class is using, these examples go from page 406 to page 415. And in there, they show us how to take a form from a book by a single author, how to take a book by more than one author, how to take, if you've mentioned the name of the author right within explaining what the idea is, then how you do that, okay? The samples for everything are in there. Over on 408, a work by two authors, a work by two or more authors, authors with the same last name, two or more works by the same author. So there's every possible sample you could use, okay? Now, your book does have a sample research paper in it, but I photocopied some of this so that I could point some specific things out to you. I hope you don't see this backwards. I hope you see this forward, okay? But we have an idea that starts up here with the word legislation. And it says, legislation, however, is not a popular solution when it comes to Americans and the food they eat. According to a nationwide poll, 75% of Americans are opposed to laws that restrict or put limitations on access to unhealthy foods. And then in parentheses, it says Nearguard and Ajusta, okay? See that? Nearguard and Ajusta. And what that means is this idea came from a work by Nearguard and Ajusta. That's the two authors for that work, okay? Now, this is not print work, it's internet work, so there's no page number, okay? If this were a book, then you'd have Nearguard and Ajusta, and then the number like 37 or something, which means it came from page 37 in there, okay? So that when I'm reading your paper, if I want to go exactly to that idea, you are telling me right here that this idea came from right here. And again, if there's page numbers, then there would be a page number there too. So I can get right to that idea. Critical, critical, critical. To not do this, to take somebody's idea and not tell us exactly where it comes from, is considered plagiarism and the stealing. Okay, you're stealing somebody's idea because you're not giving them credit for it. And the penalty for plagiarism is an F. Okay, so don't get caught in plagiarism. Okay, so a little further down then, in the next paragraph, at the end of the next paragraph, we see, and in Mississippi, legislators passed a ban on bans, a law that forbids local restrictions on food and drink. Okay? And at the end of that, we see the word Conley in parentheses. Again, this is another internet article, and so we don't have a page number after it, but that's obviously a work by Conley. Okay? So that's at the end of this idea, we're telling what the source for that idea was. And you have to do that all through your paper, where every idea is from. Notice, in this first one we looked at, this is not a quote, okay? There's no quotation marks around it. This is not a quote. We took the idea from somebody else, but we rewrote it in our own words. It's still their idea. So you have to tell where that idea comes from. In this one, we know that this is a quote because there's quotation marks around it, okay? So we know that this idea comes from here, but also that this is the exact words that Conley used in giving that idea. So when it's a direct quote, you put quotation marks around it, but you document it the same way, whether it's in your words or the words of the same author. Every idea you take from somebody else, okay? So, and that's why I told you, as you gathered the ideas that I had you put on individual cards, and you should have seen vividly why you needed to put each idea on a separate card in setting up your introduction last week. I told you make sure you know where that idea comes from, both author and page number if there are pages. And if there is no author, then what would go in these parentheses? Because a lot of works on the internet especially don't have authors. So what would go in here would be the title or part of the title, okay? And if it's an internet article that doesn't have a title, then you'd put enough of the website in there so that I can get to the article. Because what you're doing is you're creating a roadmap in your paper from every single idea you get from somebody else back from your paper back to its original source. Okay? So you make sure that you put that roadmap in there with every idea. And again, the samples are in your paper. And at the end of those samples, they give you all sorts of forms also for Works Cited. We'll talk about Works Cited in just a second so that you understand the difference. Okay? So there is a sample research paper in your textbook. Let me give you the exact page for this, starting on page 449. And you will notice in there that every single idea that comes from somebody else is documented. And that's exactly what you do. You're writing research papers, so therefore pretty much all of your ideas are documented. Now, can you take anything from personal experience? We talked about this before. Yes, you can, but I would save that for late in the paper. We're not looking for an opinion paper here, and we're not looking for stuff you already knew. We're looking for you to have researched this all out, okay? So all the samples are in here. And again, we've talked about this stuff before. Okay, then at the end of your paper, you will have a Works Cited, okay? So hopefully you're writing things down as I told you this. And if you haven't been writing things down, stop the video now, get yourself a notebook and some paper or a pen and start to write these down, because I have a lot of important points in Works Cited that I have to point out to you, because a lot of people write a really good research paper and then screw up the Works Cited or screw up the way they document, okay? So the two biggest mistakes people make in research papers, number one, they don't document properly, or number two, they don't follow the form for Works Cited, okay? So again, you know, there's samples for every Works Cited kind of form that you would need starting in your book on number 17, okay? But let me point out the critical points that people make so many mistakes on, okay? You see what a works cited looks like, okay? So at the top of the page, centered, you have the word works cited, okay? That's an important part. And the works cited goes on a separate page. You don't just put it at the bottom of your last page. No, no, no. It goes on a separate page. I told you early on that you want material from at least 6 different sources. So your works cited should be at least 6 long. It might be 27 long. And if you had 5, I'd let you squeeze by with it as long as you did your works cited right, But you need to be showing roughly 6 sources that you used information from in your paper. So what that works cited is it is showing exactly what the source is for each of the ideas that you documented within your paper. Okay, so for the person who thinks, well, I put down my works cited, that tells where all the ideas come from. No, no, no. Again, idea by idea, as I showed you in here, we have to show where idea by idea comes from. So this idea comes from here, and this idea comes from here. Okay, and then what do these terms mean? Well, if you look at this sample works cited that's in your book and that I photocopied for you, okay, one of those samples that I gave you from the other book was Nearguard and Ajusta, and on your works cited, here's Nearguard and Ajusta. And another one was by Conley, and up here we see Conley, okay? What do all these things mean? Okay, your works cited, again, it's a list of the works that you actually took information from, okay? It's not just everything you used to get general ideas. It's places where you took specific ideas from. Now, you set up your works cited, and there's very specific ways to do it. Please write down every single one of these. Again, I already said this, but we'll say it again. The word works cited goes in the center of the page, side to side, center of the page, near the top. Okay, works cited. Just exactly like this. Then you double space down to your first entry, and you notice you double space all the way through here. There are no double spaces. So after you have an entry, you don't double space before the next entry. It's double space, double space, double. The same way your text is. Your text is all double spaced. Okay, so this is set up in the same way as your text for up and down spacing. However, important things about the works cited. Your entries go here in alphabetical order by the first word in the entry. And in most of them, that's going to be the author. So here's your first author, Conley, okay? And we see the next author then, or the next one we don't have an author for, so it gets alphabetized by the title. And the word "the" does not count in titles, so it gets alphabetized by F and facts, okay? And it takes all of these information so that somebody can track it down. Then the next one is written by a person named Goodwin, okay? So C, F, G, M, N, okay, in an alphabetical order all the way through. So the items in your works cited go in alphabetical order by the first thing in the entry, author's last name if you have an author, if no author, title, you see samples of that, okay? And if no author or title, then it's going to go in alphabetical order by the website. They're all going to start with www. So then you have to go after that www to get them in order. Okay, so alphabetical order. Okay, so make sure you mark that down. You have the word works cited at the top, double space down to the first entry, double spaced all the way down through each entry. So that's number 2. Number 3 is we are in alphabetical order by the first word in each entry, and there's samples for every single entry you could come up with, okay? Now, look at the indentation here, okay? This is something that students mess up on all the time. In Works Cited, we use what's called reverse indentation. So if you look at this, you can see that the word Conley is coming over to the margin. And then the second line in that entry is indented. Okay. Then we come down to the next entry. The word the comes over to the margin. And then every line after that in that entry is indented. Then we come down to the next entry. And we see Goodwin. That comes over to the margin. Every other line in that entry is indented all the way down. So we use reverse indentation all the way through here. Okay, see these? Author, and then next lines are indented. Okay, so if everything fits on 2 lines, that's great. If everything fits on 1 line, that's great. But in every entry in your Works Cited, the entry starts at the margin, and any line after that is indented 7 spaces. Okay, that's the normal indenting, 1 inch, so that's 7 spaces. Okay, so that's how you set up a Works Cited. You double space throughout, and you in alphabetical order by the first word in the entry, and reverse indentation. Okay, those are all critical things. Alphabetical order. Okay, so that's how you set up a Works Cited. And again, this is only the things that you used to actually tell where ideas are. So for the paper that I showed you 1 page of earlier, this one, all of the material in this paper, and it's in your book, came from the sources in your Works Cited. And we're telling you where every single one of these comes from. Okay? So, again, your book gives you samples of all of those. Okay? We are using the MLA style. It's not rocket science, it's form. I don't invent this. This is the form you have to use. Now, be the first class I've ever had where nobody goes through, writes their whole paper, and then doesn't document any of the ideas in their paper because they say, well, it's all in the Works Cited. No, no, no. Idea by idea by idea, as I showed you here. Okay? Idea. This comes, here's the source. This is where this idea comes from. This is where this idea comes from. And I blew these up. I wasn't going to blow up the whole thing because it's in your book, but I blew these up so you could see them. So plant that seed in your mind, and that's what I need you to be working on, okay? Questions, you know where to get me. I got a question from somebody this week about what do you mean by a short argument? Okay, no problem. I just sent back to him a little explanation of what I meant. So if you have questions, ask me. If you need to, call me up so that we can go through this. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. Okay, so have a good week, and you'll be a good way into your paper when you get this week's assignment done. Okay.